Well, the decade of the 1950s was definitely a watershed decade for East Texas. It was the dying of the last frontier of Texas, essentially. I guess maybe people along the Rio Grande might argue with that, but at least a great culture that had swept across the underbelly of the United States all the way from the Virginias and the Carolinas ended on the Neches River in the 1950s. And that was the commons that everybody treated the land as belonging to everyone. And if you wanted to protect something, it was the landowner's responsibility to build a fence around what he wanted to protect. And everything else was open range. And in my early lifetime, you went anywhere you wanted to. You could get on a horse and ride for days in any direction of my hometown of Zavala and not encounter a fence. If you did encounter a fence, you might ride a short distance and find a corner of it and be free of it again. So all up and down the Neches River and Angelina was unfettered ingress and egress. Then the stock laws. People grew tired of cattle killing and maiming people on the highways. People grew tired of cattle and horses and hogs coming into towns and scattering dung up and down the streets and fleas and ticks and just lying down in the roads. I can remember Mr. Barge feeding his cattle right in downtown Zavala and interrupting the traffic, stopping it on Highway 69 for long periods of time. Cars would have to just sit there and wait for some minutes before they could ease around and get through all that mess. So there was a real problem, but it was a culture and a society that had evolved over time. Lufkin's stock law was passed, or Angelina County stock law was passed in 1952, but that doesn't mean that they began to close the woods off at that time. It was just a shot fired across the bow. But as time passed and more people were forced to enclose their animals behind fences, and as authorities of the county sheriffs and things were expanded to force that, the woods became more and more closed off, and the timber companies this was a great boon to them. They had been wanting to close their wood for quite some time. For one reason, probably the main reason, was that hogs root up little pine seedlings to eat that tender root off the bottom of that pine seedling. So hogs can destroy, if they had planted an area or if natural seedling had occurred there, they could destroy an area of pine seedlings in a night. And so companies they didn't like that. And then people felt nothing about going on to company land, cutting down a cypress tree for the lumber out of it to make cypress shingles for their house. Or if a bee tree was growing on company land, they went in and cut down the tree and extracted the honey from it and just left the tree lying there. And they just used the land as if it were their own, and which it had been for generations. So the company seized these opportunities to form up hunting clubs. And the hunting clubs were often, the companies hired old outlaw hunters to be their enforcement officers. Well, these hunters knew the whole tricks of the trade, and they knew how to stop people from hunting. They also took bulldozers and plowed ditches across all the old wagon roads that led down to the river. They put fences across many of the roads. They did everything they could to close off access to the river and to the forest, simply because to protect the integrity of their hunting clubs. And they charged people to be a member of these clubs, which over time has grown to be a really significant income for the companies, but originally it was just to protect their private property rights. Today, because of these actions that have been taken over a period of time by private individuals as well as companies, there is essentially the younger people have been disconnected from the land. There's no appreciation really for the natural things that take place out there. I find it interesting sometimes, and I have conversations with young people, and I'm talking about college-educated, 30, 20-year-old young men and women, and I ask questions like, where is the Neches River? And most often they do not know, and forms the western boundary of our county. I ask them where the Angelina River is, and they don't know, and it forms the eastern boundary of our county. They can't identify a sweet gum tree from a hickory tree. And to me, that is tragic. It's maybe not important that they know how to identify those trees, but they need an appreciation for the fact that each one of those plants forms a different function, and it enriches our life by what it does. Sweet gum trees, or black gum trees particularly, are notorious for their cavities so that wild animals and nesting birds can nest in them. Oaks, the most sizable bounty that from coast to coast, I guess, along the eastern seaboard for sure, the mainstay food supply for animals and birds is acorns. Acorns is the manna of wildlife. So every time you cut down an oak tree, you deprive a wide array of birds and animals of foodstuff, plus they're also a great source of cavities. So you reduce the nesting sites for many plants and animals. So we have these people that are detached from nature. They want to know about it, but their experience with nature is maybe reading a National Geographic magazine, or a Walt Disney program on television, or a video game that they can play and interact with nature. They don't feel the heat, and they don't feel the mosquitos, and they don't feel the air in their face, and they don't smell the sound of the scent of decaying cellulose, or the smell of wild azaleas wafting through the air, or hear the call of the pileated woodpecker, or at night the hoot of the barred owl or the great horned owl. And so we don't really, all I can say, David, is that we have just totally lost our contact with nature, and they're all interested in it, but they can't put their hands on it. They can't become a part of it. They can't experience all of the senses that I've tried to mention.